So why are we here? We're hearing amazing work. How do I follow the kind of stories about how ABB is transforming and using this technology to do great things? But why are we here listening to this stuff? Like, how do we know we're putting our chips in the right place? How do we know we're not wasting our time listening about this technology changing that much and that quickly? Because we're not very good at this. We're really not very good at this. Predicting the future is something that we're quite poor at. Actually, if you look back through history, there are many statements and many examples where we've completely got this wrong. Drilling for oil. It's got to be crazy. No one's going to do that, right? An Oxford professor once said the electric light bulb is a complete waste of time and will go nowhere following an industrial roadshow. But hey, guess what? We're all in this room right now and there's no windows in here. My favorite, Justin Bieber's tried, but it's still around, right? It's still around. We get it wrong in technology more often than we get it right. We're always saying the wrong things. We're always assuming that yesterday will not actually get us to where tomorrow happens. But then equally in technology, we constantly find ourselves going, oh, this new thing I'm seeing is going to be fat. It's going to be a flash in the pan. It's going to be nothing that we're going to see transform things. Guilty of those things. Some of those statements have been made by our executives in the past. So how do we make sure we're focused on things that do matter, that will make a difference to our organizations, that will enable us to be employed in 10 years? Because that's kind of what we're here for, right? We want to hear about the future. We want to understand why we're still going to be around in 10 years. Well, the answer is actually looking back, interestingly enough. So I'll kind of talk to you about why there is a pattern emerging of how the future is perceived and how we actually already know what the future looks like. We're just maybe not thinking it's the most important thing to us right now. So let's look back over the last few 10-year periods. So, mainframe. Awesome. Who's still got a mainframe? Not many hands going up. I'm sure a few banks have. PC LAN era kind of took over from that, but it was around for 10 years before the PC became that primary way of computing and accessing information. And then the web happened. And the web was kind of a result of us needing persistent information and being able to connect to more than just the people that were on the network around us. And the web, Google thought, well, if we get in that early with the search engine and a browser, that's all we're ever going to need, a browser. That's all we ever need to access information. Nothing more. We don't need a PC anymore. That's gone. Just need a browser. And then that was proven wrong by mobile technology. Lots and lots of smartphones were around prior to the iPhone, but Apple managed to democratize and make that kind of interface, that touch interface, and that hyper-personalized information access something everyone wanted. They wanted to have that information access localized to them. So it wasn't about having a browser anymore. It was about having a much broader set of functionality that was much more personalized to you as an individual. So what are all the buzzwords now? What are all the things that have been happening recently that are likely to become the paradigm shift now? And now all of the buzzwords on here, IoT, the Internet of Things, data, artificial intelligence, bots, machine learning, augmented reality and virtual reality are all words that we've heard, and they've actually been around for, guess what, nearly 10 years. The other thing to note here is every 10-year period starts off with something that seemingly completely changes everything around us. So when the iPhone launched in 2007, everyone was like, oh my God. Some journalists were like dismissive of it, others were like, this is the next thing. Everybody in the room now has a touch smartphone in their pocket. Everybody doesn't really think about taking map knowledge or using a malways in their car anymore, right? They just pull out this map of the entire globe in their pocket and goes around trying to find out where to get to the next coffee shop or take a picture of the next coffee and shove it up on Instagram. But the fact of the matter is, all of this innovation actually slows down toward that 10-year threshold. That's the original iPhone on screen. Does it look that different to the 4.7 or 5 point whatever inch device in your pocket right now? Not really. So even though there's been a lot of innovation happening over that 10-year period, it slowly hits a threshold and a bump where it can't really meet the intent that we have anymore for it. It becomes normal. And that's the big thing here, intent. And we don't actually treat intent very well. We're actually pretty bad at it. We think about mainframes. We had those because accountants, as they're now called, were called computers back then. They actually did the maths and worked out the books and figured out how business was going. And those guys wanted to get stuff done faster, and someone invented a mainframe. And to get to the mainframe and to meet your intent, you had to go to a physical location because you couldn't put a mainframe in your house unless you had 50 grand worth of air conditioning and a giant room at the back. So being able to do that meant going to the office. It shaped the way that we did work from day one. And then our intent changed. We wanted to be more personalized. We got used to kind of computing and getting stuff done for us and driving that thing to do the things it's good at, which is math. So then what else can we do? Can we do resumes? Can we do budgets? I mean, the ultimate one up here is homework. Microsoft's mission was to put a PC on every desk and in every home. What's the fastest way to sell equipment to people globally? Tell them their kids' grades will go up, right? You can do your homework on this stuff. My God, buy one quick. Anyone bought an iPad for their kids for the same reason? Right, so this is the thing. It kind of is it's a motion that meant that we then had this thing in our homes and we had this thing in our office that was personalized, and it was connected to other personalized devices. But we had to fulfill our intent by loading software onto it, and that meant disks, piles of disks to start with, and then eventually kind of the ability to put CD-ROMs in, all this other stuff. But the problem with that era is Facebook. Connecting to people that aren't in the office. Now imagine having Facebook and it only exists on the office LAN. What does your friendship group look like? Bob from accounts? Is that like your main friend? Doesn't really work, right? People don't interact socially just within people in the office. So the web mentality meant that we wanted to be able to connect to people globally. We wanted to find sources of perpetual information that we could share, trade, get search at scale. And that meant then moving to this web era where we had the e-commerce kind of bubble happening and all that kind of stuff during the 2000s. Now all that information now perpetually exists, and it's kind of increasing in scope all the time. So then we think about mobile. Well, okay, so what did that do for me? Well, actually searching all the time for things to fulfill my intent is a little bit clunky, a little bit slow. It's not kind of, I don't know what's out there. There's this massive wealth of information, and I've got to put some words in to get back what I want. So mobile enabled us to have this hyper-personalized information like location, and start having the information start to feed us a bit. So you could actually, tell you where you've parked on Google Maps. Now, the ultimate example of this that I like to give is the other day I was in the cinema, and I sat down in the cinema, and I loaded up an app, I don't know if anyone's heard of it, called Run P. Anyone? No. So you pick your film, press start, sit down. Now, when there is a lull in the film, an area where nothing really happens, which happens in all films, buzzes in my pocket. Time to go run pee. My wife's looking at me like, where are you going? I'm like, crap part of the film, really? Now, who is the customer of that application? Only me, correct. Who should be? Every biological human being in the actual movie theater, right, that's drinking a large Coke. Everybody in there should have access to this IP. Now, the intent is broken because the intent is what we want to be able to get done. We want to just go in the cinema. It knows I booked tickets online. It's in my inbox. It knows I'm sat in the cinema watching that film. It knows at what time it started. It knows my location. But I still have to go get the app. But meaning I'm the only person that benefited from that. So where's all our contextual computing? Why are we not meeting the intent of everybody? Why do we have to go fetch everything? Doesn't make sense. We're treating it badly. We're actually making us go fetch for our intents. And that is what's driving the change in IT. That is the paradigm shift that we're seeing. That is Industry 4.0. Wherever we are, if we're able to digitize the world around us, and we're able to shadow us with some form of artificial intelligence, understand what our intent is all the time, and every touch point we start to make is making a note about that, then we can start to really serve up some interesting information. We can stop having to pull everything, and we can actually just operate and have things given to us in context. It's a massive change. And the reason everybody's getting so excited about this wave is it doesn't just solve labor and the things that we do, it also starts to solve distribution and where we actually access that information. Those two things together mean that we're going to get a huge scale change, not an optional one that we have to pull. But it creates its own interesting paradigm changes, and this content comes from much smarter people than me. James Whittaker, who's a distinguished engineer at Microsoft, is very active in this space if you ever read his Twitter or his blogs. But it's a change from a UI that we can see to one that we can't. Because everything we're doing and everything we're programming for and the data we're picking up about the assets and the digital twin, which is the industry kind of term, of the world around us, is picked up almost invisibly. It's an invisible revolution. There's so much data, we can't actually interpret it on a screen. It kind of becomes too difficult for us to pick scrolly menus and pick the options we want. You have to actually think about how's a machine going to parse all this information and make sense of this for us. The data needs to become way more centralized, or at least organized, so we can actually go and tap all this stuff. And I think it was great seeing that ISO 95 pyramid and all of the layers kind of coming together, because that's what we're talking about. How do we actually start to break those communication barriers of different types of information and start to organize ourselves so our digital picture is flexible and accessible? How do we get stuff pushed to us, driving us to do work off the back of that, rather than us always constantly interpreting stuff, looking at dashboards? You know, how do I look at a dashboard, figure out what I'm going to do today? You don't look at a dashboard perpetually for 24 hours. So how do I get a machine to start interpreting all this data, making sense of it for me and my entire organization, and have those people doing all the things they're supposed to be doing at their optimal, and having a machine recommending things to us? So it takes on that role of shadow, kind of helper. And then once you've got all this digital view of the world and all this information that you've never been able to see before, we can then reapply it to the real world. And that's what augmented reality is. You've got this infinite surface all of a sudden to reapply all that data and all those insights that you never had before. You'll be able to see things on a physical asset that are digital information has been interpreted by a machine and presented back onto that asset. So you might think it looks okay, but actually the readings say something completely different. And that exists, that can hover straight over the top of that asset. There's a whole new way of doing stuff. And I'll go through a video shortly that's going to show you some of the interesting things that ABB's been doing in that kind of space. So what happens if we get rid of screens and we let machines make decisions and we give them access to heaps of data around the real world and they're able to predict us, our work, and our intent? Because if you ever know about your mobile phone, 80% of its battery life is a screen. So if you remove the screen, all of a sudden, all your wearables, all of your access to things, your sensors, go on forever. I've got people that have built smart systems and smart sensors for monitoring workshops, and they can go for 12 months on 2 AA batteries on their own wireless network. You can kind of get some really interesting use cases come out of this. And actually, you know, we start to become the slow point of integration with any of this information. What we need to do is kind of have the system deal with a lot of this stuff and start to react to it. And that's going to lead to this explosion of connected devices. We said 25 billion earlier. Another analyst says 50 billion. Some others are saying more. There's a lot. That's all we can kind of say. And a lot of this stuff, you know, will be door locks and, you know, baby cameras and all that kind of stuff. But actually, the industrial Internet of Things is kind of where Microsoft sees 70% of the benefit to the human race being, and 70% of the revenue. So all of the assets that you manage, maintain, purchase, the things that ABB creates, that is where we're going to see most of this development and most of this explosion happen. So then the big question under all of that is, if these devices are now smarter and they're faster and the machines are making decisions for us and we're kind of optional and we're just saying yes or no and we're the slowest bit of the whole system, and we've distilled the whole world to data, are we optional? Because this is the question that all the newspapers like to pose, because it makes you click the link and makes you read the article. Now, the big thing here is I've got two views on this, and I'm going to show you both, because I'm not entirely sure which one's going to play out. And I think actually it's down to everyone in the room to decide how this plays out. Where's this? Anyone? Port botany. There's no humans in that dock. None. Zero. It unloads ships 24/7 with no injuries, no strikes, no wage disputes, no illness, and no damage to the goods. So it's already happening. But they're only coming for those blue-collar jobs, right? Nope. Anyone concerned? Lawyers, went to uni, 7 years, spent all this time, worked my way up in JP Morgan, and all of a sudden, a supercomputer called Coin replaced me. I don't need to do contracts processing anymore. What do you need me for? And it does the work of all of those lawyers in about 60 seconds. So, That's fine, isn't it? Surely, there's some jobs like that we're going to start to see go by the wayside. Have you seen this thing? It can jump. It can go skiing on snow. I mean, some of these things are extraordinary. But they're being built for kind of the right reasons. Like there are some other robotics firms who have been focused on health and safety. How do I stop people going into dangerous environments? How do I help them do the thing that they're best at, which is the inspection, without actually putting their life at risk? And so this is what I call a cobot, collaborative robot. So how do we actually work with these kind of technologies to make sense of them? And what are we going to be distilled down to? I mean, this is the Facebook F8 conference this year. Mark Zuckerberg's walking down the aisle to no applause because no one can see him because they've all got VR headsets on. Does it remind anyone of anything? I don't think it's that bad. And let me show you why. In 1950, there were 2.5 billion people on planet Earth. That's the men and women distribution left and right. Did anybody who was born shortly after 1950 or was around then have to look after the family while the parents went to work? Did their parents have to look after the family while their parents went to work? If you look at the distribution of children to workers to the elderly, there's a lot of children there, not so many workers, and statistically, no point going above 80. So nobody really lived drastically a long time. And there's a real reason for that. The reason that parents had to stay at home and look after the families is because they had to. The necessity of it was the people that were earning the wage were in the middle, and there weren't enough of them to sustain the huge growth in children during this period. Fast forward to today. 3 times the population in 50 years. That's a lot of people. But notice how the curve's just gone straight up. Why? We're not having more children, we're just getting older. Statistically, that curve now goes up to 100. It's pushed the entire working class to the center. There's less children as a percentage compared to the number of adults that are working, and there's more elderly people living longer inside of that curve. These are all open statistics. I didn't invent them. I'm just showing you the graph. So what's going to happen in 30 years? Because we all like to retire at 60, 65, don't we? Well, it's just going to get taller and skinnier with a lot more elderly people. So if we want to retire at 65, there are a couple of things we need to note today. One, we need to increase output and get better at what we do. Because right now, this means we retire at 80. There's a deficit in the number of workers per 100 to support that aging population. Number 2, someone needs to really come up with a way to look after old people with robots, because that's going to be the only way to start making this work at scale. But the fact is, this is all statistics that were driven by people that are way smarter than me. And if you actually look at the scale of our people problem, we need to produce more food, we need to produce more housing, we need to produce more output. Nobody lives longer and doesn't want to consume. And so if you create electricity, if you build product, if you manufacture something, if you move people around, they're all things that this audience are going to need more of. And we can't do more with the same number of humans that we have right now because they're going to be getting beyond that working age. So how do we use their knowledge potentially without using their bodies? And how do we actually use and make sure some of this stuff happens more effectively, more efficiently using digital technologies? There's a key theme here, and Microsoft does have a very clear stance on this. We're not comfortable with machines kind of invading our space as humans. And so people that invent this type of technology, like Microsoft, have a really big responsibility to make sure that we do this in an ethical way and that we invent technologies that help humans, they don't replace them. And so what we've been focused on really heavily with AI and humanity is having this view of artificial intelligence technologies and all these digital technologies doing the right thing. Making sure that we're helping people come along that journey with us, making sure we're helping more people go into STEM degrees, making sure that there are future jobs available to people to actually take on some of this technology and to increase that output in a meaningful, ethical manner. There's also some really discrete examples that I want to share with you that make this obvious. Now, if we're going to get to 7.5 billion people, and that's where we are now, and we're going to get to 10 or 9.5 or whatever they reckon in 30 years, That just increases all of our people problems. So the number of people that go missing, the population growth, where people are going to live. Now, Microsoft's been turning some of this technology to some really big human problems, like the hundreds of thousands of kids that go missing in Asia every year. And so there's a story online, you can read it. I'm not going to show the video because I wanted dry eyes in the room. But there was a father who lost his son. He was autistic. He went to the bathroom, he came back, and he was gone. And he was only 8 years old. And he was gone for 4 years. He lost his son for 4 years. And he manually searched for that kid every day, as you would as a parent, every day. And he went further out and further out and further out. And he couldn't, one guy cannot see all these faces that he needed to see. He's in a province of China with 14 million people in it. So Microsoft, or one of the developers, happened to get in touch with an organization called Baby Back Home. And they look for missing kids. And so they just happened to run a machine learning algorithm that was tuned for aging. Because the big problem here is not finding the face, it's finding the face amongst a child that's now 4 years older. Like, he's changed dramatically. And so tuned the algorithm for facial recognition for that child and found 24 apparent matches, one of which was only 20 miles away. So that father got reunited with his kid. AI helping humans? Like, we're not very good at scanning millions of faces, but this stuff is, right? We can actually turn this into something useful. And then looking at other cognitive services and how they're being used, Microsoft's got some fantastic developers, some of which have no sight, partially sighted. And those guys have been working for a few months using some of this amazing cognitive technology that's been invented to help the 285 million people across the world that are hard of seeing, of which 39 million are completely blind, to actually see using that bit of technology in their pocket, to actually make it do something more than it could yesterday. I'm just going to show you a quick video of what that looks like. And this is a free app. They gave this away to the world to try and help these guys.
Seeing AI is a Microsoft research project for people with visual impairments. The app narrates the world around you by turning the visual world into an audible experience. Point your phone's camera, select a channel, and hear a description. The app recognizes saved friends.
Jenny near top right, 3 feet away.
Describes the people around you, including their emotions.
28-year-old female wearing glasses looking happy.
It reads text out loud as it comes into view, like on an envelope.
Ken Lawrence, P.O. Box.
Or a room entrance.
Conference 2005.
Or scan and read documents like books and letters. The app will guide you and recognize the text with its formatting.
Top and left edge is not visible. Hold steady. Lease agreement. This agreement
When paying with cash, the app identifies currency bills.
$20 US.
When looking for something in your pantry or at the store, use the barcode scanner with audio cues to help you find what you want.
Campbell's tomato soup.
When available, hear additional product details.
Heated microwave bowl on height.
And even hear descriptions of images in other apps like Twitter by importing them into Seeing AI.
A close-up of Bill Gates.
Finally, explore our experimental features like scene descriptions to get a glimpse of the future.
I think it's a young girl throwing a frisbee in the park.
Experience the world around you with the Seeing AI app from Microsoft.
Assess power pylons can help blind people find their packages in the hallway. And the only reason I mentioned that last one is because someone on Facebook, completely unbeknownst to us, did a public post the other day saying that they managed to actually find their parcels out in the hallway of their US building because they were just scanning the phone around and they found their name on the first parcel they hit. So is it perfect? No. Does it help them achieve things they couldn't yesterday? Yes. Was it worth developing? Well, absolutely. If this type of AI technology can help people see, then that's the kind of stuff we should be aspiring to do. So what are we going to do about jobs? How do we create jobs? Well, keep talking about looking back 10 years all the time. Let's look back 10 years now. So this quote was done in 2013 by the US Department of Labor. It's been echoed many times across the world. But effectively, most kids that are employed today, in school today, there are no jobs tomorrow for them to do that exist today. So actually, there's a whole bunch of new jobs we need to go create, and they need to have the skills today to think about or even go into those new roles. So how do we do that? Because again, this is about prediction. Well, let's think about 10 jobs that didn't exist 10 years ago and do today, or they were nowhere near as prevalent as they are now. Mobile app developer, iPhone came out. Guess what? I'm not building apps. Apple didn't even have an app store on day one. All of a sudden they did. Guess what? How many of you got mobile app development teams inside your organizations? built from nothing, right? They were a job that didn't really exist. Education or admission consultant. You want to send your kids to the best school? Get one of these. They actually exist now. They're all over the place because parents are earning more. We're slightly more affluent than we were 10 years ago. So we're trying to make sure that we have the right education choices, and we're kind of looking across all those types of schools. Chief listening officer. It's a good one, isn't it? Being able to adapt your organization quickly with a board-level position that's listening to what the public is saying about you. Wow. Who would have thought listening to the customer would get that important? UX design. Doesn't really matter how this technology works, if it's clunky and horrible and difficult. Of course it does. It's the main thing now. Everybody expects that. In fact, the removal of the UX in the next paradigm is going to make that role probably the most important thing when it comes to dealing with this type of technology. These jobs didn't really exist or really had little to no impact on most of our organizations 10 years ago, and yet they do now. So every wave has the potential to create some new jobs that we never expected. Now, MIT Sloan has an interesting view on this. They came up with 3 categories, and they've got jobs they've made up inside of this, but I actually think it's quite smart. Start with the top one. Trainers. In the AI era, in the digital era, we need somebody who can teach, train, and make sure this technology is doing the right thing. It's not necessarily a developer, although there's a large group of those who are going to be needed for this, but there's actually people that need to have an empathy with the customer, with the worker, with the things that we're trying to do with this technology, and they need to be able to train that. We did a retail bot recently with a large retailer in the UK, and they won't let anybody loose in their store to be a rep, just with no training. Just go talk to customers about stuff, knock yourself out. They actually train them. They give them the right language constructs, the way we deal with customers, how the things that we're expected to do. So we spent nearly as long training the bot to talk to their customers the way they wanted it to as we did developing the bot, which coincidentally was 2 weeks. So the fact is, you actually need people who are going to train these things and continue to train them to make sure the outcomes that you're expecting to get are going to make sense. And it's not just bots, it's the models, it's the digital interpretation of the world around us. And that involves everybody who's got a background in engineering, all of the deep expertise that exists within companies like ABB. It's really important here because you could be the world's best data scientist, but you're going to have no idea how a gas turbine works. So you actually need all of that human expertise and all of that data science input and all of that stuff to actually train some of these models. And we need to come together to produce those kind of outcomes that we're expecting and that kind of increase in output. Then we've got explainers. How on earth does a CEO make a decision on some of this stuff when it is, for all intensive purposes, a black box to them? So you need somebody who can actually understand the business construct of where the organization wants to head and the business leadership side of things, and the tech and where it's going and how it's developing and who's good at it and who's not and how does it work. And we need to be able to bring those two things together, and we need to explain the strategic importance of that stuff. And there will be many, many jobs inside of here. The one I like the most is the Chief Disruptive Officer. They spend their entire time sitting up on the board going, we're not doing that anymore, that's crap, that's not going to work tomorrow, that's not going to happen. So they actually spend their entire time kind of bring technology and ideas and things that are going to make everybody sit up and go, wow, okay, maybe we shouldn't be doing what we did yesterday. And then the third one is around sustainability. So once this thing's in production, once you've got a bot and all this data and it mirroring your assets and this mission-critical infrastructure is now being managed by an AI effectively, how do I make sure that that keeps running, and if I don't get a result I expect, that I can change it quickly and that I'm making sure that I'm continuing to adapt and improve things? And that's how sustainers start getting into this environment. It's about people that can actually run and analyze this. Now, if something happens that's legally contestable, who's going to break it down in a court of law and explain why the AI did what it did? These guys. Who's going to be ethically in charge of making sure that it did the thing we expected it to do in a fair and unbiased manner? Or if it didn't, how do we correct that? These guys. Years of ethics training are required for that. Years of logic training. These are all things kids need to be starting to pick up in the education system now. We all have a voice about the education system, by the way, because we're going to be employing these people, so we need to make that decision now and kind of help people kind of make those changes. So what am I talking about bringing all this together? Well, really the big theme here is if we've got IoT on one side, it's really about capturing, manipulating, controlling the real world, the physical world. So we're turning the physical world into data. We're storing it somewhere that's low cost. And then we can start looking for new patterns, things we could never, ever find on our own. Not as a human. And then we start using artificial intelligence to predict and interpret and guess and even start looking for things that we could never find inside of that environment, we can then represent that and recombine it back onto the real world, and we can therefore be more effective. Now, this changes our reality. If you ever get a chance, there's a really nice session by Anil Seth and Ted around consciousness and how we see the world, and how our biases and our upbringing and our mental models filter all the information we receive. Millions of bits of information every second, and we just filter most of it down to the base level that we see is important to us. Now, if we operate organizations, businesses, and physical assets like that, how do we make sure that our reality is reality? And so this is where this type of technology is going to give us a new reality. It's going to start offering us a different truth that we need to be open to looking at and understanding and interpreting and iterating over. To get really good, we need to break our mental models and actually start thinking the way I used to do stuff is not the way I'm going to have to do it. This is a really interesting video from ABB in the robotics division where they were using augmented reality, IoT, connected technology, and a digital model of a robot to actually program the robot using HoloLens in the real world. Because it's obviously it's easier for us to see three-dimensionally how to program that from this kind of environment. So actually this is the true definition of a digital twin. This is a real view of the actual world, if you will, overlaid in the real world, and then actually controlling a physical asset itself, which is a robot on a production line. And I just want to finish with one example of some of the interesting things that Microsoft and ABB have done together to really distill that whole picture and bring it to the real world today, especially in the EV market, which is one that, if you've seen the launch of the Tesla Model 3 is about to go big, much bigger than it has been today. We're starting to see this kind of interesting use case around using this type of technology so we can bring this new electrical infrastructure to the edge and make sure that it keeps working. So we're getting really good at what we're doing again.
Problems happen every day. Some of them occur in plain sight, while others happen without you ever knowing it. They never happen when it's convenient, and there's nothing more frustrating than a problem you can't solve on your own. Some problems are worse than others. But what if we can fix these problems before they ever occur? Microsoft and ABB have come together to do just that. Together, we've created a solution that not only monitors the health of ABB's charging stations, but can predict issues and recommend corrective measures before the customer ever feels the impact. ABB technicians have a holistic view of the entire system at their fingertips. Together, Microsoft and ABB enable users to manage critical real-time data and take action. So customers never have to feel the pain of a problem they can't solve.
I just want to share one last thing with you thinking about this. Yes, it's NASA, yes, they're kind of full of propeller heads, but they have taken a complete remote, drone, basically, if you think about it, over in Mars, mapped the entire surface, and then they've reapplied it back to a studio using augmented reality so they can explore the surface of Mars here on Earth. Now, if they're able to do that across what is seemingly impossible distances and agreeably impossible budgets, but the fact is, this type of technology is accessible to everybody today, and we can bring it back down to our own levels and our own assets, and we can start to do some of this kind of interesting stuff. The big thing is kind of getting started. Thank you very much for your time.